Yeah.
Not the club. Great.
You doing it, Julie?
Yeah, I've done it.
Okay.
Did you get the notification?
No.
I did, yes.
Oh, Linda Pose is in now. Oh, because I'm the host, Evan. That's and we're sharing the account, so you don't get a notification, but it's recording.
Forgiven's frozen, is he?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a shame.
All right. Well, let's get going. And so I'd like to welcome everybody. Thanks for making the time to join us. In the last couple of months, I've received a number of phone calls from members asking me, what do I know and understand about the proposed new industrial relation laws that are set to come in, and I know very little about it. So I asked around and went on a bit of a hunt to find HR specialists, and was introduced to Belinda Fyffe. So Belinda is the CEO and Senior HR Strategist, Lead Trainer at the Proven Group. And we've spent a bit of time going back and forth, and I think Belinda's business will be a good fit to help the retailers where necessary. And so if I can hand over to you now, Belinda, and take it from there. And then at the end, if people have got questions, we'll have a bit of time for that. And if you would prefer to ask Belinda questions offline, we'll send the details.
Lovely. Thanks so much. And thank you, Evan and Julie, for the opportunity to come along and speak to everyone today. Pleasure. I love an audience, basically. So if I've got an audience and someone's interested, I'm happy. Just share my screen. This is mainly, I put a little presentation together mainly so I remember what to say. It's what I find helps me out with these kinds of things. So the piece of legislation that's been passed and this IR changes that have gone through is called Secure Jobs, Better Pay. So the bill has now officially been passed. It got passed at the end of last year. And we're going to see stuff in the media and changes coming through in relation to this bill across the whole of 2023. So there are different dates when different bits of the bill actually become something that we've got to know about and think about. So I thought today we'd really run through a bit of a high-level overview of what the main changes are. Some of them are going to be more relevant to you than others. So I did have a bit of a conversation with Evan prior to today, and where they're ones that we think probably aren't going to be that relevant for you, I'm happy to sort of skip through fairly quickly. But I'll still mention them because I think it's important that you have an understanding of what's actually going to happen. So the first thing to say is it is the most significant change to the Fair Work Act since its inception. So Fair Work came into being on the 1st of January 2010, and it's now 2023. So this is the biggest changes that we've seen to it. There's been tweaks and things made in the past, but this is the biggest probably changes that we've seen. So just be aware of that, first of all. Two key areas that have tried to be addressed with the changes that are coming in is around job security for people and gender equality. So we're starting to see more and more these things coming into play in legislation. So the job security bit is obviously job security for employees. So we're seeing things, additions made to provisions that were already in the Act and things that are being tightened up. And the gender equality piece is specifically around sexual harassment, but also, equal pay for equal jobs. So the main areas that these key changes will cover here on the screen. Flexible work, I would think, would be something that the members would need to know about and have a bit of a good understanding of what are the circumstances in which they can say no if we have an employee that requests flexible work. It is becoming harder and harder to have reasonable business grounds to refuse that. Things like anti-discrimination and special measures, the sexual harassment stuff at work is going to be really important, and the prohibition of pay secrecy, which has been a sort of standard clause in most contracts of employment for a very long time, is, this is your offer of employment, we're going to pay you X, these are your conditions. Don't talk about it with other people. We're actually not allowed to say that anymore. So this one's gone through already. So as I said, it's employees' choice now whether or not they decide to share information about their remuneration structure with others. So that could be other people within your organisation, but it could be friends and family and total strangers and, all that kind of stuff. It's up to them. What they can't do is disclose other people's remuneration structures. So they can't say, I'm on this and Betty's on that, so they can share their own, but not other people's. So the thing for the members to understand is that if you've got a template contract of employment that you're using for people, you need to have a look at that. And if you do have a clause in there that prohibits employees from disclosing their terms of agreement, you need to remove that moving forward. So this one's in already. Prohibiting sexual harassment at work. So this is not new, hopefully. So pretty much everyone should have a good understanding that sexual harassment has been prohibited for some time, particularly in workplaces, but in other places as well. And we have a lot of state legislation around this. So usually an Equal Opportunity Act in each of the states. What's the difference here? The Fair Work Act has incorporated this. So it specifically puts more onus on employers in workplaces. And so basically what it's saying is a person must not sexually harass another person who is a worker in a business or an undertaking seeking to become a worker. So someone who's applied for a position with your organisation but hasn't got the job yet is still covered by this legislation, or somebody conducting a business or undertaking. Now, the definition of a worker is also very broad and one that we should probably touch on. The worker includes employees, obviously, but also contractors, subcontractors, outworkers, apprentices, trainees, students on work experience, and volunteers. So it's quite a broad sort of ranging thing. There is a positive duty now on employers. So you've got to be able to show that you've communicated the requirement to your team and that you've taken all reasonable steps to ensure that sexual harassment isn't something that happens in the workplace. Don't forget, sexual harassment isn't just against women, it can be against men if you've got a mainly female workforce as well. So it's not, just one gender way. But importantly, employers can be vicariously liable for sexual harassment perpetrated by an employee or their agent if the harassment was done in connection with employment or engagement. So it's about protecting yourself, making sure that you've taken all the reasonable steps that you would need to educate people on what sexual harassment is and what's not tolerated, and ensuring that that's policed moving forward. That's a pretty big one. I've spent a little bit of time on that one because it does have that vicarious liability for employers in there. They've also taken the opportunity, seeing as they were doing all these other changes, to increase anti-discrimination by these 3 additional attributes. These are probably not news to most people because, again, most state legislation has these 3 things in it around anti-discrimination. It just brings the Fair Work Act into line with other pieces of legislation around at the moment. So it's important that you update your internal policy on anti-discrimination. And again, any induction or onboarding that you've got for your new employees, that's communicated as well. So we can't discriminate now on any of the protected attributes. The 3 new ones to be added in: breastfeeding, gender identity, and intersex status. So you can't make an employment decision based on those attributes, and you can't make a promotional decision, and you can't make a decision on whether or not people are going to get professional development based on that. Flexible working arrangements have been around since the start of the Fair Work Act, and so that shouldn't be news to anyone. But what we're seeing now is that this is being extended, and it's being extended around specifically the family and domestic violence leave, entitlement that we've now seen, and that's actually come in as a paid entitlement. Currently, employers are not paying for that entitlement. It's a government payment, but mark my words, they'll push that down to business pretty quickly. I think over the next year or two, we're going to see that move, and it'll become an expensive business as well, because I can't see the government paying for it forever. So what this is saying is, if somebody is experiencing or themselves, or they're assisting a family member or a household member who's experiencing family and domestic violence, then they can request flexible working arrangements. And it's also now including pregnant employees have a right to ask for flexible working arrangements. So the key word here is ask. You don't have to give flexible working arrangements, but you've got to be able to prove that you've genuinely tried to reach agreement around what those flexible working arrangements might be, and that you're able to provide detailed reasons for any refusal. So refusals have to be on reasonable business grounds, but if you do end up refusing a request for flexible working arrangements, then make sure it's in writing and make sure that you've really tried to explore all other options available, because this can be one that's going to trap a lot of people, I think, in the future. Now, fixed term contracts, not sure if this one's going to affect too many of the members, but I thought I'd touch on it just so that you know it's around. So fixed term contracts is where we employ somebody and we have an end date in the contract at the beginning. So we might employ somebody, and the one that people have a good understanding of is if we have somebody go on parental leave, we might employ somebody to take over that role while somebody else is on parental leave, and then they'll exit the business. The new person will exit the business when the person on parental leave comes back. That is one of the exceptions to this. So there are a number of exceptions around this new change to the fixed term contracts, but basically what it's saying is you can't employ somebody on a sunset date and then, every 2 years, and then give them another contract for 2 years and another contract for 2 years and another contract for 2 years. So it's either got to be an ongoing arrangement, or it's a maximum of 2 years, and you can only renew it once. Importantly, they are going to be releasing another information statement. So as you'd be aware, we have the Fair Work information statement that you have to give all new employees. A couple of years ago, they introduced the casual information statement for which you have to give in addition to the Fair Work information statement for anyone who's a casual. And now there'll be a fixed term contract information sheet for anyone on a fixed term. That's not available yet. They haven't released it yet, and this one doesn't come in until later in the year. Misleading job advertisements, which I'm sure nobody here would do, and nobody in the association would do. So this one came in and has applied from the 7th of January this year. So it's already in and working. And it's basically what it's saying is that your job ad can't include pay rates that would breach the Fair Work Act or your relevant award or other instrument if you've got an enterprise agreement with a collective agreement with your employees. So again, probably not new, because you can't employ somebody that's paid underneath what the awards say anyway, but this is now just saying you can't put it in an advertisement either. Now, the next few slides actually look at the bargaining stream or the enterprise agreement stream. Now, I spoke to Evan prior to the session today, and we thought, this may have limited relevance to the members, because I'm not sure how many of you have got an enterprise agreement that's registered with Fair Work, but it does change quite a lot around this process. And I mentioned to Evan, I was with a HR manager in a manufacturing organisation earlier this week, and he has about 200 employees. They don't have an enterprise agreement, never have, don't see the need for one. But there are some changes coming in now that could mean that his organisation may be swept up in an agreement involuntarily. So I'll talk about that, because it may be an issue for you guys down the track. I'm probably not seeing it as a major risk though, for the members of the association. But supported bargaining stream basically means, a collective agreement for employees who've traditionally had difficulty in bargaining at the single entry level. So this covers organisations like retail organisations, disability childcare. So they tend to be the organisations that are, award paid, the lower end of the scale. So I thought just from a retail perspective, it was interesting for the membership. Employers can bargain together. The common interest test needs to be satisfied. So what this means is you don't, as a single organisation, you don't have to do an enterprise agreement with just your employees and yourself. You can actually be part of a larger group of employers that put an agreement together, provided you've got a common interest. And the employees would need to be able to be represented by a union. So whether or not they're a member doesn't really matter. But employees may be added to an agreement, as I said before, involuntarily, and that's the risk. So the guy I was speaking to earlier this week has actually said, we're actually now contemplating doing an enterprise agreement, not because we want one, but to stop us involuntarily being dragged into another enterprise agreement that we didn't have anything to do with in the first place. It kind of, and Evan said, didn't you say to me, Evan, that's weird. Where's the agreement? Where's the,
Yeah. Where's the offer? Where's the acceptance? Yeah.
Absolutely. So remains to be seen how this one's going to play out, but I just wanted to raise it as an, for the members that they understand. Enterprise agreements, pre-approval process, there's been a little bit of changes here. So the current pre-approval requirements will be replaced with one requirement, that Fair Work is satisfied that the enterprise agreement has been genuinely agreed to by the employees covered in the agreement. So instead of having all these little bits that you've got to tick off from a checklist perspective, they're now saying, as long as there's genuine agreement by the employees, which can be the majority, it'll be okay. Intractable bargaining. So this is where you can't come to an agreement. Fair Work will now, the Fair Work Commission, I should say, will have the ability to make a decision for you where you've come to the point where the two parties can't make an agreement. So that's not an ideal situation for employers because, you never know what they're actually going to come up with. It doesn't have to be something that's been put on the table. They could come up with a third, option that you may not like. So it's always, if you're going to enter a bargaining process, always best to come to some sort of agreement. You might have heard this in the media, and I just love it. I love this graphic, actually. Sunsetting zombie agreements. Has anyone seen that in the media? Have you heard of it at all? So this is basically any enterprise agreements that were made prior to the commencement of the Fair Work Act. And so, as I said at the start, the Fair Work Act commenced on the 1st of January 2010. So if you've got an enterprise agreement that's older than that, and it's never been replaced, it's actually still in effect. That's what they're saying. And so pre the Fair Work Act, they're trying to get rid of everything that was pre-Fair Work. So you've got a 12-month grace period to address that and either get a new agreement into play or look at what that's going to mean for your business moving forward if you just sit under an award structure, which is probably the simplest way to go. The Better Off Overall test remains, but there's been some updates to that. So it's now applied as a global assessment rather than a line-by-line comparison. So what this means is any agreement that you make, whether it's an individual agreement in a contract with an employee or it's a collective agreement with as an enterprise agreement, the employee has to be better off overall than they would have been underneath the award and the national employment standards on their own. So what that means is it takes into account, obviously, the financial side of things. What's their rate of pay? Are there any penalties payable if they work evenings or weekends? What about, overtime rates, all that sort of stuff. So it takes all of that into account and always has. But what this is now saying is instead of just looking at it line by line financially, you've got to take it. The Better Off Overall test also takes into account things like, is it reasonable to ask somebody to work their ordinary hours across 6 days a week instead of 5 days a week, for instance? because of the impact on family time and time off and all those kinds of things. So it's not just about the money, the better off overall test. It's also about, you know, is the employee better off overall in their life? And importantly here, it's now global. They're just looking at it as a whole, as opposed to looking at each line in particular. I thought it was useful to have some of the dates around some of these things. So a lot of changes came in on the 7th of December last year that are already here. So things like the prohibition of pay secrecy is already in. We've already got the new protected attributes from an anti-discrimination perspective. We've got our sunsetting of zombie agreements. So that 12 months grace started on the 7th of December last year. The Fair Work Commission now has powers to correct errors in enterprise agreements. So what's happened in the past is often an enterprise agreement has been genuinely agreed to. It's gone to Fair Work to be ratified, and Fair Work said hasn't been able to ratify it. They've had to reject it. And usually it's not because of anything terrible that's in the agreement. It's because of, you know, technical issues, or they haven't followed the exact right process, or, you know, there's all these sort of technical things on why that's the case. So what that power does is the Commission has the power to correct errors in enterprise agreements, so they can correct that technical issue and then ratify it, rather than pushing it back to the parties to renegotiate where they're actually at. On the 7th of Jan, that was when the job advertisements, you know, changed, and you had to not mislead anyone with rates of pay that weren't covered by the Fair Work Act or your award. The 6th of February saw the abolition of one of the commissions, that's been rolled into one of the other ones. The 6th of March, which is Monday, that's when the prohibition of sexual harassment in the workplace provisions come into place. So it's quite timely to have this webinar now, because what we're looking at from the 6th of March is what reasonable steps have employers taken to set up systems and communicate to their teams around sexual harassment and what's prohibited in that sort of space. 6th of June is when we're going to start seeing the changes to the enterprise agreement making stuff that I've just talked about. Changes to extending unpaid parental leave, including giving the Fair Work Commission the power to deal with disputes. So since one of the provisions with parental leave and that came in with Fair Work back in 2010, it's in the National Employment Standards, is that, you know, people can request up to 12 months off unpaid when they have a birth or adoption of a child that's father or mother, not an issue as long as it's only one party. But they can, during that time, request a further 12 months off unpaid. That's not new. That's been around since 2010. And, you know, largely employers kind of have to say yes. That's the practicality of it, unless you've got reasonable business grounds to say no, which would be pretty hard to prove, I would think. So we're going to see some extensions to that unpaid parental leave, including giving the Fair Work Commission the power to deal with those disputes. More employees are being able to access flexible working arrangements. So again, flexible working arrangements, really, really big under Fair Work. But also, and I think, you know, it's important to have a good understanding of this as employers. You know, it's a candidate job market at the moment. It's hard to find people. It's hard to keep people. And flexible job arrangements can be a really key way that you can stand out from the crowd, other employers, get good workers and keep them. So, you know, although it's being legislated that you've got to look at these things, I think it's good business practice anyway. 1st of July, we're seeing a creation of a National Construction Industry Forum. Hopefully has no impact on you guys at all. And an increase in the monetary cap for recovering unpaid entitlements via a small claims process. So again, I haven't got that detail as yet. 6th of December this year, limiting the length of fixed term contracts. So that's when our fixed term contract stuff comes in, which is going to affect a few of our clients. So largely clients that are government funded. So, you know, if you've only got government funding for 3 years, well, you don't want to give somebody an ongoing contract. But hopefully that's not an issue for you guys. So I did want to say just thank you to Evan and Julie for inviting me to come along. So that's your kind of really high level overview of the main changes to the industrial relations landscape, the Fair Work Act this year that have gone through. We're the Proven Group is a human resources consultancy, and we work with small to medium businesses, from people who are putting on their very first employee through to 200 or 300 employees, and we do the whole range of the life cycle of the employee stuff. I did want to offer, actually, if anyone's interested, and people who are watching this on the recording are included as well, but our director, Carmel Brown, has written a book entitled Less Headaches, Happier Team, More Success, which is an awesome read. It's a quick read. It's an easy read. Very first chapter is entitled Staff Drive Me Crazy. So that sort of tells you a little bit about what it's like. It's a free offer from us, and it's available on our website. So at thepruvengroup.com.au/book. You just fill out your details there. We will mail you a copy of a physical book. How's that? Like, not a PDF, not an ebook, not something you got to put on a screen, an actual physical book that you can have a bit of fun with and have a read of. Lots of examples in there around engaging staff, how to get them to, get on board, paddle the canoe in the same direction as you, and, hopefully make you feel that you're not in it alone. Always do love this quote at the end of presentations. If you think compliance is too expensive, try non-compliance. So that was actually said by Paul McNulty. He was the former US Attorney General. And I really like that one, because we often, that's how we talk about HR. HR is like an insurance policy. You don't need it until you do. And when you do, you're pretty glad you've got it. I've had discussions with people during the week on various matters, but suffice to say, nobody rings us with good news. So they're usually ringing when there's an issue, someone's requested something or someone's done something, or, the whole thing's just kind of fallen apart a bit. And then they give us a call, and we're basically a phone a friend at that particular point in time. So as Evan said, really happy to be partnering with you guys and being available as a phone a friend, just on an ad hoc basis. We will always quote you before we do anything for you, so that you're aware of anything that may cost. However, if you just got a really quick question, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we don't charge for that. It's much better to just get it clarified, move forward, and then we know that in the future, when you've got something else, bigger that you need help with, then you'll come back to us. So we're always more than happy to do that. There's our 1300 number, and our HR at the Proven Group is the best one to go to. That goes to several of us, which means that you will have an expert giving you a call back in a timely fashion. So that's me. And I've left 4 minutes for questions, Evan.
That's terrific. Thanks, Belinda. So if anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask now, please go ahead. But if you'd rather ask Belinda offline, we'll provide details in an email later on today. So, but if you want to ask questions, now's your chance.
Linda, you mentioned in one of the slides about have to have some union representation for something or other.
Yeah.
I doubt if anybody in the industry's in a union, apart from maybe truck drivers.
So, unless union represents some of the employees, yeah. So so normally, so this is about the supported bargaining stream, as opposed to people or employees doing it on their own. So normally a union would represent the employees, and the employer would have an agent that helps them with that bargaining process, because it is quite a process.
Right.
You don't have to have one to have an enterprise agreement, so that's okay. But it's this supported bargaining stream specifically that would require at least one employee to be in a union to be able to utilise the union to help the employees. So the union isn't going to come and help a group of employees unless they've got a member. So you can't use the supported bargaining stream, but there's nothing stopping you leave if you want to have an enterprise agreement as an employer, just bargaining directly with your employees who are not in a union. That's okay.
Are there any benefits for members to be in a union? Do you feel without that could be a very lengthy discussion, just in a few very short words?
Would you like Belinda's opinion?
Yes.
No.
No. Okay, good. That's mine too.
No, and I'll tell you why. Unions came about, if you look at the history, unions came about in the Industrial Revolution when we had children working in textile factories and mines, and everyone got injured because the machines took fingers off and all that stuff left, right and centre. So unions were formed because the only power the employees had at that time was their labour and the withdrawal of their labour. But they had to do it collectively, because if they didn't do it collectively, you know, I just lost and everybody else gained. So that's where the union movement came from.
Yep.
And that's because there was no legislation at that time. What we have now is a lot of legislation that provides minimum standards and requirements on employers. And so all the union can do is hold employers to the legislation, which they're held to anyway.
Okay. Fine, thanks.
That's okay. So Belinda's has an opinion about that.
That's good.
But good question, thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
So you're going to send us all a link, Evan, for the video?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll try and do that during the day. So, all right. Well, look, I know everybody's busy. I hope this was of assistance to you. I know it was a high-level overview, but it gives you a sense of the changes that are happening, and but also an introduction to you know, a HR business that you know, you can get in contact with. And as I said before, we'll provide those details. And if there's any other topics around HR that you'd like us to dive into during a Zoom session, just let us know.
I've got heaps, so.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, I know everybody's busy and they've got to open up their shops, so let's wrap it up.